Martha was 65 when she finally spoke her truth. She had no pension, no retirement savings, no partner by her side, and, perhaps most painful of all, no longer a place in the life of the one person she had given everything for, her son. To the outside world, she was just another older woman living alone in a modest, rented apartment near downtown, quiet, unassuming, invisible. But behind that stillness lived a story, a lifetime of love, heartbreak, and relentless strength. She had raised a child, buried a husband, and worked her hands raw for decades. And after all of it, she was left with only a roof over her head and a heart full of silence. For years, Martha believed aging meant fading, meant slowly disappearing from relevance. If she wasn't useful, she wasn't wanted. Her worth, she thought, was measured by what she could give, not who she was. But life, in its quiet, unexpected way, began to teach her something else, that there is great power in starting over, even late in life. This is not a story of loss. It is the story of a woman who found peace on her own terms, who chose herself, not out of necessity, but because she finally realized she was worth choosing. And if you've ever felt forgotten, overlooked, or quietly pushed aside, maybe this story belongs to you, too. Chapter 1. The Loss. Martha used to believe that old age would bring serenity. She pictured slow evenings on a porch with her husband Tom, watching the sky fade to pink over the Kentucky hills. She imagined Sunday dinners with her grown son, and maybe, someday, grandchildren laughing in the yard. A quiet, simple life, full of love. But life doesn't always follow the path we plan for it, not even the ones we hold most tightly in our hearts. The day Tom died was cold. By mid-morning, the sky had turned dull gray, and mist settled over the fields. Like always, Tom left before sunrise. He kissed her forehead, poured his coffee into a thermos, and said, "Don't wait up, hun." She never did, but that day, she would have given anything to wait. The call came around noon, a foreman's voice, heavy and solemn. There had been an accident. A scaffolding had collapsed. Tom was gone before the ambulance arrived. There was nothing anyone could have done. At first, Martha didn't cry. Her hands shook, but her eyes stayed dry. She hung up the phone, walked back into the kitchen, and turned off the pot of beef stew simmering on the stove. Then she sat at the table and stared at the floor for what felt like hours. The funeral passed in a blur. People offered words, hands on her shoulder, casseroles crowding the counter. But Martha felt detached, like she was watching someone else's life unravel. A week later, a man from the construction company knocked on her door. He didn't meet her eyes as he handed her a check. He said the company had no proper insurance. They were barely afloat. $40,000 is the best we can offer, he said. If you want to fight it in court, that's your right, he added, not unkindly, but in a tone that said, it won't matter. Martha looked at the check. Her hands, weathered from years of work, trembled as she held the thin slip of paper. $40,000. It felt like a slap. It felt like blood money. Still, she took it. She folded it carefully and tucked it in the back of the drawer that held Tom's wallet, his glasses, and the watch he wore every day for 20 years. She didn't tell anyone, not even Jacob. She couldn't bring herself to say it aloud, that her husband's life had been reduced to less than the price of a new car. Without Tom's income, things quickly tightened. The house was modest, but the bills didn't care: heating oil, groceries, property taxes. Martha stopped buying meat. She stretched every dollar, picked up mending jobs for neighbors, patched worn-out clothes, and sold eggs from the coop. Jacob, still in high school, offered to quit school and work full-time, but Martha refused. "Your daddy wanted better for you," she told him. "You'll get there." But underneath her strength was fear, not just of bills and loneliness, but of something heavier. She was afraid of fading away, quietly, completely, with no one left to remember her story. 2. The sacrifice, giving it all to the ones we love. Jacob was always ambitious, even when he didn't quite know what to do with it. After graduation, his test scores weren't good enough for college scholarships, and they couldn't afford tuition on their own. He was restless, full of energy and dreams, and determined to get out of their small town. "I want to go to Chicago," he told her one morning over toast. "There's work out there, mechanic jobs. I can make real money, Mom." Martha's heart sank, but she nodded. She didn't want to hold him back. He was 18, full of fire, and believed in a better future. How could she be the one to say no? Before he left, she gave him $1,000 in cash, money she had saved over months by cutting every corner she could. "Just in case of emergency," she told him. "Don't touch it unless you really need to." Jacob hugged her tight, kissed her cheek, and promised to call every Sunday. At first, he did. He called every week, just like he said. He told her about the city, how fast everything moved, how loud it was, how different it felt from home. He said he was working at a repair shop, starting with oil changes and tire rotations, but that the manager liked him. Then one Sunday, the tone of the call changed. He sounded nervous, hesitant. "Mom," he said, "can I ask you something?" He explained that rent was expensive, $1,000 per month just for a studio apartment. "That's $12,000 a year just disappearing," he said. "It's like I'm throwing money away." Then came the request. "If I had a little help, I could buy something, a small place. I found a unit that's just the right size, and the bank will give me a loan. But I need help with the down payment. I was thinking, maybe the money from Dad?" Martha felt her chest tighten. That money had sat untouched for nearly 2 years. She thought of it as sacred. Tom's final gift, a safety net for emergencies, her backup plan if everything else fell apart. Still, Jacob's voice was soft, full of hope. "It's for us, Mom. For you too. One day, I'll bring you to the city. We'll live in the apartment together. When I make enough, you won't have to worry anymore." She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. So she said yes. The next day, she went to the bank and transferred all $40,000 to her son's account. Jacob bought the apartment. It was small and unfinished, but it was his. He sent her a photo. Bare walls, a mattress on the floor, a single window with the city skyline in the distance. Martha printed it out and pinned it to the wall above her sewing machine. She looked at it every day. She started working harder, planted more in the garden, took on more sewing repairs, raised 2 pigs instead of 1, sold everything she could during the holidays, and mailed him the earnings. When Jacob came home that first Christmas, she handed him $500 in cash. "For paint or furniture," she said. He smiled and took it but didn't say much else. She never asked for anything in return. She didn't need to. The joy she saw in his eyes, however fleeting, was enough, or so she told herself. What she didn't know then, what she couldn't have known, was that this would be the beginning of a slow unraveling. One where promises faded into silence, one where love would be taken for granted, and one where Martha would have to find the strength to build a life again, not through her son, but through herself. 3. The invisible mother, forgotten but still here. Time has a way of thinning even the thickest bonds when effort is no longer mutual. For Martha, the distance between her and Jacob had grown quietly, like dust in the corners of a once lived-in room. At first, the calls came once a week, then once every 2. Eventually, they became unpredictable, sporadic, rushed, and often initiated by her rather than him. Martha never said anything about it. She told herself Jacob was busy, adjusting to life in the city, maybe even overwhelmed by work or bills. But she felt it. The silence, the space, the slow unraveling of connection. Still, she sent him small care packages, batches of cookies, wool socks, letters folded with $10 bills tucked inside. She added little notes with each one. Stay warm. Don't forget to eat. Love you always. Jacob rarely responded, but she clung to the idea that he appreciated them, that somewhere inside he still felt her love, even if he didn't say it out loud. Then came the wedding. Not through a phone call, not through Jacob, but through a neighbor. One crisp autumn morning, as Martha was bringing in her laundry from the line, her neighbor Connie came over with a bright envelope in hand. "I think this was delivered to me by mistake," she said with a small smile. "Congratulations." Martha stared at the envelope. Her hands felt suddenly heavy. Inside was an invitation. Elegant script, thick paper, a gold border. Jacob was getting married. The wedding was in 2 weeks, in Chicago. She read it again and again. The words didn't change, but her heart did. First, disbelief, then confusion, then something harder, grief. He hadn't called, hadn't told her, not even a mention. For 3 days, she said nothing to anyone. She folded the invitation and placed it next to the photo of Jacob she kept on her nightstand. At night, she stared at it and wondered, was I not meant to know? Or did he simply forget that I might want to be there? On the 4th day, she made up her mind. She packed her best dress, a navy blue one with a modest neckline and lace trim she'd worn to church weddings over the years. She booked a bus ticket to Chicago, 12 hours, 2 transfers. She didn't care. She would go. She would show up. The chapel was beautiful, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows and white roses lining the aisle. Everything looked expensive, tastefully arranged. The guests were dressed in tailored suits and pastel dresses, their smiles fixed and practiced. Martha found her name on a place card near the back of the hall. Her seat was in the last row, next to the door. She sat quietly, folding her hands in her lap. No one greeted her. No one asked who she was, not even Jacob. When the music swelled and he walked down the aisle, he never looked in her direction. Not once. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. She didn't want to cause a scene. She didn't want pity. She just wanted, for a moment, to feel like his mother again. But she didn't. During the reception, she lingered along the wall, watching from a distance. She saw her son dancing with his bride, laughing with her family, toasting with champagne. Martha tried to catch his eye. She raised her hand once, half-heartedly. He never looked over. No one asked her to join for photos. No one asked her to stand beside the bride and groom. It was as if she wasn't there at all. She left before dessert was served. That night, in the small motel room near the Greyhound station, Martha sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The silence in the room was thick. She whispered into the darkness, not expecting an answer. "I don't think he saw me." 4. The betrayal. Used, ignored, discarded. After the wedding, things became even quieter. Jacob didn't call. Weeks turned to months. The packages Martha sent were no longer acknowledged. She left voicemails that went unanswered, sent birthday cards without reply. She told herself he was busy, starting his new life, adjusting to marriage. But deep down, she knew she was no longer part of the picture. Then, one afternoon, she found out the most painful news of all, not from her son, but from a neighbor down the road. "Jacob's a father now, isn't he?" Connie asked casually. "Someone mentioned his wife just had a baby girl." Martha felt the wind knocked out of her chest. She hadn't known. There had been no phone call, no text, not even a photo, a granddaughter, her first grandchild, and she hadn't even been told. Hands trembling, she picked up the phone and dialed Jacob's number. It rang 4 times before someone answered. It wasn't him. It was her daughter-in-law. "Oh," she said flatly. "It's you." Martha tried to keep her voice steady. "I just heard about the baby. I didn't know." The reply was sharp. "Well, we've been busy. Jacob has a lot going on. We didn't have time to update everyone." "I would have helped," Martha said softly. "I could have, I don't know, just been there." There was silence. Then the voice on the line shifted tone. "If you really want to help, you can come take care of the baby. We're both working. We need someone during the week." Martha blinked. "I'm not sure I can. I mean, my back isn't what it used to be. I have trouble lifting." The voice cut in. "If you're too old to help, maybe you shouldn't expect anything from us. You want Jacob to take care of you? Then you need to be useful." Those words struck deeper than any silence ever had. Martha stood in the middle of her kitchen, holding the phone like it was burning her hand. Her knuckles turned white. She said nothing more. She hung up, and for a long time, she didn't move. The late afternoon light poured through the window, falling in golden strips across the floor. Outside, birds chirped like any other day. But inside her, something was shifting, something fundamental. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was clarity. For the first time, she saw things exactly as they were. She had given everything, her money, her time, her heart, all of it, without question. And now she was nothing but a burden, something to be used when needed, forgotten when not. She sat at the table, the one Tom had built decades ago, and stared out at the empty yard. And there, in the quiet, she made a decision. She would not beg. She would not wait for a phone call that might never come. She had spent a lifetime putting others first. Now, finally, it was time to choose herself. 5. The turning point. The day she chose herself. For days after the call with her daughter-in-law, Martha barely spoke to anyone. She didn't cry. She didn't pace the floor. She didn't shout. She simply stopped. She stopped waiting for the phone to ring. She stopped planning packages she might never send. She stopped checking the mailbox for letters that wouldn't arrive. Instead, she started looking around the house, not at what was in it, but what was missing. Tom was gone. Jacob was gone. The laughter, the warmth, the dinners, the holidays, the quiet joy of a life shared. They were gone too. The house had grown heavy with silence. Every creaking floorboard and ticking clock echoed louder than words. She would wake early out of habit, but stay in bed because there was no reason to get up. She would walk past the pantry, stocked with jars she had canned for someone who never came home. She would sweep the same spot on the porch out of reflex, even though no one ever walked those steps anymore. Then, one morning, something changed. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't arrive like a revelation from the heavens. It came in the form of an ache in her hip as she bent to feed the hens. A simple, familiar pain, but one that whispered a question. If not now, when? She stood up slowly, looked across the yard to the faded barn, and whispered into the morning air, "What am I still waiting for?" No answer came, but she already knew it. Nothing. No one. That afternoon, she opened a clean notepad and began to write. She listed what she owned, what she could sell, what she needed. She called a realtor. She made an appointment at the bank. She searched online for small apartments in nearby towns, places with sidewalks, grocery stores, public libraries, people. It wasn't about running away. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even about loneliness. It was about something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to name in decades: self-respect. She had always told herself that being a mother meant sacrificing, enduring, giving without expecting anything back. And maybe, in many ways, that was true. But now she was more than just someone's mother. She was still a woman, a whole person, and that person deserved peace. So she sold the farmhouse. She sorted through boxes of old memories, choosing what to keep and what to let go. She wrapped Tom's photo in a soft towel and packed it carefully. She donated clothes, furniture, even the good china she'd been saving for holidays that never came. Then, with everything she owned packed into the back of a borrowed pickup truck, she left. She did not leave bitter. She left free. 6. The Rebirth. Finding peace on her own terms. Martha's new apartment wasn't much, a one-bedroom unit in a modest brick building just outside the city limits. The walls were thin, and the kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people to stand in. But it had sunlight. It had warmth. It had silence that didn't ache. It comforted. Her neighbors were kind, quiet, mostly retired. They nodded in the hallway and held doors open. She liked that. She found a job at the local church, helping clean in the early mornings before the congregation arrived. It wasn't glamorous. It paid just enough to cover groceries, utilities, and the occasional cup of coffee at the diner across the street. But the work gave her something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. Each morning, before the sun had risen, she would tie her hair back, slip on her worn but dependable shoes, and walk the short 2 blocks to the church. Tucked inside her coat pocket was a small radio, quietly playing oldies she'd hum along to as she swept the floors, dusted the pews, and lit a few candles when no one was watching. Sometimes, before leaving, she'd sit in the back pew. Not to pray exactly, but to breathe. And for the first time in a long while, that simple breath was enough. Her days found a soft, steady rhythm. Tuesdays were for groceries, Thursdays for laundry. Sunday afternoons, she wrote letters to herself. She stopped sending packages to Jacob. No more money, no more voicemails, no more care wrapped in silence. At first, that quiet felt unnatural, but soon it began to feel like strength. She filled her windowsill with pots of herbs, hung a wind chime outside her door, bought herself fresh flowers every Friday from the corner shop, just because. Occasionally, she'd see a mother holding her child's hand and feel an ache deep in her chest. Because love doesn't vanish, not true love, but she no longer let it control her. She had given all she had to give. And now, finally, it was her turn. One evening, cup of chamomile tea in hand, she watched the streetlights shimmer through the sheer curtains of her small apartment, and she felt something unfamiliar, but deeply welcome. Peace, not the kind that comes from being loved by others, the kind that blooms from knowing you can love yourself. She whispered into the quiet, not to anyone in particular, "I'm still here, and that's enough." And it was. She had no pension, no savings, no family calling to check in, but she had herself, her capable hands, her clear mind, her quiet dignity, a life she built on her own terms. And in that, she had everything. You are not alone. Martha's story is not unique. It's not loud. It's not grand. And that's exactly what makes it powerful. Too many women, after a lifetime of raising children, supporting spouses, and holding families together, find themselves invisible, forgotten, left alone to navigate the years that were supposed to be restful. But Martha chose differently. She chose herself, and in that choice, she offered a quiet but profound truth. Even without a pension, even without savings, even without someone beside you, you still have worth. You still matter. You still deserve peace. So if you're reading this, maybe sitting alone with your own cup of tea, wondering when you faded from view, hear this. You are not invisible. You are not broken. You are not a burden. You are a woman with stories, with wisdom, with strength. And it is never, ever too late to live a life of your choosing. You are not alone, and you never were.